Have you ever heard of the idea of cheating in the gym? Like, oh, I was doing an exercise and then I started to cheat. Or, I don't want to do this exercise because every time I do, I can feel my body cheating. What does this actually mean? What is implied by it? But more importantly, what should you take away from this idea of cheating in the gym? On today's episode of the Exercise is Health podcast, this is exactly what we're going to be discussing. We're going to cue the intro song and then we're going to dive right into this conversation. Welcome to the Exercise is Health podcast, where we're talking about exercise, health, and the interconnectedness of the two. We are your hosts, Charlie
and Julie,
and we will be coming to you every single week from our studio, Muscle Activation Schaumburg. Hey, what's going on, exercisers? This is Charlie. Before we dive into this week's episode, I want to let you know about a new training that's happening this week titled How to Rebuild Your Aching Body in as little as 6 weeks without changing your lifestyle. See, if you love the discussions that we have every single week on the Exercise is Health podcast, but you want more of the practical application, the details of how to take the information and apply it to your workouts, then you need to be on this training. All you have to do to get registered for free is go to secrets.exerciseforlifemethod.com. But space is limited, so make sure to get registered ASAP. Now, without further ado, let's dive into this week's episode. Hey, welcome back, exercisers, to the Exercise is Health podcast. We are your hosts, Charlie
and Julie,
and we're coming to you from our studio, Muscle Activation Schaumburg, here in Schaumburg, Illinois, where we believe that your health is your most valuable asset, and the single best thing that you can do to both boost and protect this asset is exercise. Specifically, exercise is geared towards building the health and function of your muscles. Now, so many of you exercisers have taken the time to leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, and we greatly appreciate it. So we want to read a review that actually wasn't left on Apple Podcasts, but was emailed to us. So however you want to give us feedback, we are totally open to it, but this is pure gold, so we want to share it with you.
This review says, I used to stretch, but this podcast totally opened my eyes to the benefits of muscle contraction. I've now switched from stretching to contracting muscles. I have much less joint pain now, better posture, and am seeing a day not too far in the future where I will be pain-free and physically stronger day by day. I absolutely love that review because it highlights all the results that we constantly talk about here on the podcast. This is just another case study of it working within someone's body.
Exactly. I mean, really, how cool is that? Like, just by listening and applying what we're talking about every single week, this person is improving their health and they're noticing their joints are moving better. They're feeling less achy and stiff. They're feeling stronger. All the things that we would hope for through exercising for life. So if you want to leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, we would so greatly appreciate it. If you want to give us feedback and don't want others to see it, that's totally cool too. Feel free to email it to us. We love hearing from you. Either way, it does help our podcast grow and reach more people when you take that time to leave us a rating and review. So we truly appreciate when you do that. So this week, we're talking about this idea of cheating in the gym. Are you familiar with this idea? Have you ever heard this term of like, oh, I see you doing that exercise and you're cheating? Or watch that person do that exercise. See how they're cheating? Or, oh, they have really good form. They're not cheating at all. What does this idea of cheating mean? What do people in the mainstream fitness industry mean by it? And what should you actually take away from it in terms of how we think about exercise and how exercise actually goes about improving your health?
I think when we think about exercise, at least on this podcast, Charlie and I obviously like to highlight contracting muscles and making exercise really about getting the most out of your muscle contraction, because really almost all health benefits come from the physical contraction of muscles. So when we think about cheating, Charlie and I think about cheating in terms of anything that takes away the efficiency and the potency of what a muscle can do when it contracts. So we're going to hopefully highlight what that might look like, and then also give you some tips on how to make sure that you don't cheat in terms of how Charlie and I view it.
Yeah, this is honestly a really hilarious concept to me. And I say it that way because how it is normally used, in my opinion, is extremely hypocritical. What I mean by that is a lot of times people watch somebody do an exercise and they'll watch their form and they'll be like, oh, look, they're not doing the exercise the right way. They are cheating in order to do the exercise, as if the goal of doing the exercise is doing the exercise, right? So that's kind of what is implied. And then they may go about doing the exercise and they'll be like, okay, well, look, this is how you do it without cheating. This is how you use proper form or whatever, okay? But so often when we watch people exercise who are using quote unquote proper form, they are cheating their muscles out of actually being challenged, out of having to truly like focus in on the contraction, because they're looking from the outside and saying, well, if you look in the mirror, my form's great, which means I'm not cheating. But they're missing the most important parts of the exercise, which is focus on the muscle contraction. And so because of that, they're completely cheating themselves out of the benefits and the results of doing the exercise. So maybe hypocritical is not the right word. Maybe ironic is the right word. But either way, I always cringe / laugh a little bit when somebody comes up with this idea of, oh yeah, see that? That's cheating. And then they go and show their quote unquote non-cheating version of the exercise. And it's like, yeah, you're still cheating yourself out of the results.
I want you to think for a minute. Do you guys know of like the category of people that are like good at exercise? You know how there's like the people, you're like, well, obviously you like to go to the gym because you're already good at exercise. Like you're good at doing everything exercise related. There's not a lot of people out there in terms of the total population, but most of the gym industry, most of the exercise form industry is centered around those people. So usually there are a handful of people that have the perfect lunge and have the perfect pull-up and have the perfect squat. And those are the people that are like quote unquote gym people. Here's the thing, exercise to improve your health needs to be applied to more than just quote unquote gym exercise people. There's a million other flavors of exercise that will really help to promote the health and function of your body with muscle contraction that does not have the quote unquote perfect form. When we're thinking about cheating or not having the perfect form or whatever, we're thinking about how are we highlighting the muscle so that it can get the most contraction out of this exercise. Let me give you an example of this. I think you guys will all relate to this. So one exercise that's kind of actually needs a lot of skill to do is a lunge. Have you guys ever seen a lunge? And a lot of people will say the perfect form for a lunge would be such that when you go down in the lunge, your back knee is hovering over the ground just a little bit, and the front leg has like a perfect 90 degree, and the back leg has like this other perfect 90 degree, and that is the perfect form. Also, there's minimal wobbling, there's no holding on to stuff. That is the perfect form. So we just talked about how there is a type of person that this would work well for. The person that their body is just made for exercise. But us, we are exercisers. So when we're thinking about exercising for life, it doesn't matter if we can achieve that perfect form. So actually just yesterday, I was training a client and we were body matching, meaning we were making choices for a lunge that fit her body. And her lunge looked nothing like the perfect 90 degrees in the front and the perfect 90 degrees in the back and the very hovering knee. Actually, her legs were way closer together. We didn't go down as far. We were holding on to something so that she wouldn't fall over. The balance was an issue. And what's interesting is that although externally she looked nothing like the quote unquote perfect form, like we would look at that and people would say, oh, she's cheating. But actually, if she did the quote unquote perfect form, she would have been cheating her muscles out of the biggest contraction and the most stimulus that it could have that's appropriate for her body. And instead, we body matched her body to this lunge so that her muscles could get the most out of doing that lunge.
You know, I just thought of, where does this term cheating most often get applied? Not exercise specific, but just like cheating in general. Where's it most often get applied?
School, I think.
School or sports or like anytime there's some kind of competition or comparison.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like, well, you weren't playing by the rules. All right. The rules in school say you can't look at somebody else's paper, otherwise that's cheating. The rules in some sports say, you can't take steroids, otherwise that's cheating, or whatever. Right. So there's rules. And if you break those rules, that's considered cheating because now it's not fair for the rest of the competition. Now it's not fair for everybody else that you're comparing yourself to in order to try to win. Okay. When we apply that mindset to exercise, when we apply that same term to exercise, now we force the mindset upon ourselves that, well, the goal of doing the exercise is either to win, to do it better than everybody else, or to have some kind of comparison of like, well, last week you did 100 pounds on the leg press, and this week you did 110 pounds, but you cheated this week. So this week's, 110 pounds doesn't count. It's invalid or whatever, right? But here's the thing. When you're doing exercise to build or rebuild your body, when you're doing exercise for your health, when you're doing exercise for life, it's completely absent of any type of comparison. There's no relative comparison involved with this, meaning you don't care about how much weight you did last week. You don't care about how many reps you did. You don't care about trying to do, place higher on the leaderboard or, do better than anybody else in the group class or whatever. There's no comparison involved. The only thing that you care about is improving the health and function of your body. Mm-hmm. And so once we remove that comparison of, you versus the previous you or you versus anybody else, well, then the term cheat has absolutely no relevancy whatsoever. That word cheat and the whole mindset behind it has to go out the window as well. The only thing that you could possibly cheat yourself out of are the health benefits of doing the exercise. And that's what we see so many people in the gym ultimately doing.
Charlie, you brought up such a good point with that comparison model. And when we exercise for life, there is no comparison. You absolutely nailed that, because I think there's like stages of comparison that we go through where when we first start in the gym or in grade school, when we're first exposed to like movement and gym class and exercise, it's all about sports, which is competing against another team. Even though they say, well, it's all about fun. Well, it's not all about fun, or else we wouldn't be playing sports and
we wouldn't be keeping score.
We wouldn't be keeping score. That's right. It wouldn't matter. And then it kind of progresses to people be like, well, I'm only competing against myself. I'm like, well, what does that mean? So really it ends up being, instead of competition, it's about maximizing. It's like every time we show up to the gym, we want to maximize what we have going on. I think a lot of times people listen to this and they're like, well, if we're not improving ourselves week to week to week, then exercise for life just must be about easy exercise and, exercising for doing really light weights. It's not. Sometimes it's about doing light weights. Sometimes it's about the heavy weights. But it's about assessing and maximizing what you have in that day. So when we're thinking about cheating, we're saying, I want to maximize what I can do with my muscle contraction. I'm not trying to match what other people look like when they do a lunge, what other people look like when they do a plank, etc. So what are some things that you can think about when you're thinking, okay, well, I want to go to the gym. I want to maximize this contraction and I don't want to cheat, but let's talk about the ways that Charlie and I think about cheating. The first thing is when you do an exercise, you're deciding what's going to move and what's not going to move. And once you decide those things, it is your job to maintain those, meaning in a bicep curl, your elbow moves, your body does not. If you ever go to the gym, you'll see people doing bicep curls with their whole body. So they're not maintaining the non-moving parts. Or in a knee extension, you might decide, okay, my knee is going to move, but my hips aren't going to thrust up and down. You will see a lot of people doing knee extensions, and as they fatigue, they start getting their hips involved. So deciding and maintaining what parts of your exercise are moving and what are not.
So why this is important is because you want to go into each exercise with an idea of what areas of your body you're going to challenge and how you're going to go about challenging those, okay? And once you focus on just challenging those areas of the body, you have to mentally, emotionally let go of the idea that doing the motion is a way that you're challenging your body, okay? Or is a way that you are challenging your muscles, okay? You instead need to just simply focus on squeezing your muscles. So what this means is, go back to the example of the biceps curl that Julie gave, all right? So what often happens is they'll start with doing the exercise and their elbows will kind of be right by their ribs. And then as they fatigue, their elbows might start, drifting forward with every rep, all right? Well, here's the thing. Once they start shifting, making those shifts of like, okay, I'm going to start, bringing my elbows forward, oftentimes that's an indication that in their mind, at least, they have switched the intention of doing the exercise, switched the goal of doing the exercise from trying to challenge their biceps to trying to move the weight up and down. That's not always the case, but most of the time, the vast majority of the time, that ends up being the case is, oh, you got caught up on the idea that the reason of doing this exercise is to bring your hands up towards your shoulders, as opposed to the reason for doing this exercise is to squeeze and challenge your biceps. All right. So why this is important is because you need to make that decision from the get-go, meaning like before you do an exercise. All right, this is how I'm going to have the exercise look because this is how I'm going to be able to challenge my body and this is how it's going to feel good for my body. So I've body matched it, everything like that. And then you need to try to stick to that as best as you can, continuing to body match, making the tweaks along the way. But the idea being that you don't lose the focus on just challenging your muscles. You don't lose the focus on just squeezing your muscles, because ultimately that is the thing that drives the health benefits of exercise.
Absolutely. We did a whole podcast on form, and this was a huge point that we talked about with what is form and what is not form.
And why form ultimately doesn't matter.
Yeah, especially for you guys, our community of lifelong exercisers, because we really have to start thinking about exercise differently. Now, the second way to maximize muscle contraction is going to be to slow it down and lose all momentum. One of the most common things that I see in the gym is people moving super fast. And I think because, number one, it makes the exercise easier, so they feel more accomplished, like, oh, I did 1,000,000 reps of this exercise, and it was hard, but you can make every exercise way more stimulating and appropriate for your body if you slow way down, even if that means you're doing a quarter of the reps.
Right. So in terms of cheating, what this means is the second most common way to cheat is not just to lose form, but to try to move too fast while you're doing the exercise. Okay. The faster you move, the less of an ability or the less easy it becomes to really focus on just squeezing your muscles. I had a client come in earlier this week, and she's listened to a bunch of our podcasts and she's very experienced with exercise, and we're talking about like how she was doing biceps curls. And so at the end of her session, we went and we just practiced doing bicep curls in the very focused manner that we promote. And her response was, wow, when you do it this way, you have to move slowly. It's like, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. When you do the exercise in the way that we are describing, pretty much lose the option to do it fast, because you get so focused on just squeezing your muscles. And as soon as you start to move fast, you almost always lose the focus on the contraction and you start to put your focus on moving. All right. So instead, just focus on squeezing your muscles and let that focus, let that squeeze be the thing that drives the motion. And then you don't have to worry about, oh, well, how fast should I be moving or anything like that? How slow is slower, anything like that. Because however fast you can move, that's how fast you will move. But the rate limiting factor is going to be your ability to keep your focus on squeezing your muscles. And that's really the big thing.
Charlie, I've had a handful of clients that are new, and they come in, they say, well, I did some research on you guys and listened to a couple podcasts. So they feel like they're kind of on board. And then the first time that we jump on an exercise machine, I always say, well, just show me, you've exercised before. Just show me what you would do. And their idea of slow is very different than my idea of slow. So the way to know that you're moving slow enough, because if you move like medium speed, you're probably the slowest one in the gym. So you're probably like, yeah, I go slow compared to everyone else. But remember, this isn't a comparison. So slow means that if anyone was to say stop, that you'd be able to stop right wherever you are. If you would have blown past that, that moment that someone said stop and you would be in some completely different range, you're moving way too fast. So you want to really be mindful that you're moving extra slow. And when you move slowly like this, it really highlights, again, that muscle contraction. So if you're looking for like those changes, those results that we highlighted in the testimonial earlier in this podcast, really implementing these ways of highlighting muscle contraction, really developing your muscle function. You really have to move slow and decide what's going to move and what's not going to move, and really, really stick to your guns on that.
Yeah, it's like when you're driving through the school zone and there's little kids all around, like you don't look at the speed limit and you're like, okay, well, I'm going the speed limit, so, I must be safe. It's like, well, how fast could I drive? And if a little kid darted out, be able to stop at a moment's notice and know that, I'm not going to skid anywhere. I could stop immediately and everybody would be safe, right? So you're not thinking, okay, the speed limit says 30 miles an hour, so I'm going to stick to 30. It's like, no, you're watching to make sure there aren't little kids darting out. And so you're probably going much slower than what the speed limit actually says, because you want to know that for the next 150 feet or however long the school zone is, that if any kid were to, break free from their parent's hand or go, darting out into the road, you could stop at a moment's notice and there wouldn't be like any risk of skidding further, anything like that. All right. That same idea needs to apply to how you're doing the exercise, to how fast you are lifting your weights. At a moment's notice, if anything were to change, you need to be able to stop. All right. And so like a lot of times when I'm working with clients, we'll be doing the exercise, and if I say like stop right there and it takes them, like a second or two to slow down, it's like, okay, clearly you're moving too fast. So we need to move slower, because at a drop of a dime, you need to be able to stop. And when you're moving really slowly, it's not that hard to do.
Charlie, I feel like the children in the school zone is like going to be a new principle for us, because it's like, when you're driving through a school zone, you go slow so you don't get a ticket, because you're going to get a ticket there if you're speeding. But when there's actually the present risks of children or a ball rolling in front of your car with, the following trail of little tiny humans, you behave differently. And when we behave differently in the gym like that, being prepared to stop, being on the lookout for everything going on, and moving slowly so that we don't have that momentum, then we really, really can highlight, again, that muscle contraction, which is really what we're trying to do. So when we're thinking about cheating in the gym, we're not trying to perfectly match what Men's Health Magazine is doing or Instagram influencers are doing. It doesn't matter what they're doing. What matters is that we're applying principles which will help us highlight muscle contraction to improve their health and function. And that is what's going to bring about the health changes. And when you body match and make choices around that versus trying to achieve what the instructor looks like or what your friend looks like when they exercise, the more that you won't be cheating your body out of the results that you're looking for.
So who do you know that needs to hear this episode? Who do you know that is focused on trying to do everything right when they exercise, and is almost one of those like gym Nazis about, oh, you're cheating or anything like that? Or maybe there's also the flip side of that of like, well, maybe they're not exercising because they're so concerned about, doing the exercise right. And, oh, well, if I'm doing this, am I cheating or anything like that? Share this episode with them so they can hear our take on what the actual true purpose of the idea of cheating while you're exercising is, and what to do about it. And while you're online, head on over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a rating and review. It helps people find this podcast when they are looking for information on exercise and they're looking for information on health. So if you found value in this conversation today, let us know by leaving us that 5-star rating and review. Well, thanks so much for tuning in. We always appreciate it. Have a fantastic week, and we'll talk with you all next week. So what'd you think about that episode? Did you find the information useful? If you enjoyed what we discussed during today's episode of the Exercise is Health podcast, then you are going to love what I'm going to be presenting during my new training, How to Rebuild Your Aching Body in as Little as 6 weeks Without Changing Your Lifestyle. It's happening this week, and you can get registered for free by going to secrets.exerciseforlifemethod.com. But space is limited, so you need to head there now. secrets.exerciseforlifemethod.com, and I can't wait to see you there. This podcast is for information purposes only. The statements and views on this podcast are not medical advice. This podcast, including Julie and Charlie Gates, disclaim responsibility for any possible adverse effects from the use of information contained herein. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guest qualifications or credibility. This podcast may contain paid endorsements or advertisements for products or services. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to herein. If you think you have a medical issue, consult a licensed physician.